Okay, so this is the key to worksheet one. This is actually section 1.5, part 9 on quadratic equations. You want to solve this quadratic equation, and notice that the choices are none of them are rational. They're all irrational solutions. So none of them are rational. So that implies that you cannot factor this quadratic. You cannot solve by factoring. So let's go ahead and just use the quadratic formula. So remember that the quadratic formula is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And this expression that I just wrote, the whole expression has been divided by 2a. And before we use the quadratic formula, we need to put this in standard form. So I need to rewrite this equation as 2n squared plus 10n plus 7 equals 0. And so once in standard form, you can denote what a, b, and c are. Now you just got to make sure that you are indicating the correct values for a, b, and c before you substitute into this quadratic equation. So remember that a is a coefficient of the square term, so that's going to be 2. And then b, this is a positive 10 for the coefficient of the first degree term. And then c is always your constant, and my constant here is a positive 7. All right, so I'm going to take these values, I'm going to substitute into the quadratic formula. So I get n equals this says the opposite of b, so if b is 10, the opposite of 10 is negative 10, plus or minus the square root of, and then that will be 10b squared, so b is 10, I'm put that in parentheses, so I get 10 squared minus 4 times a is 2, times c, and c is 7. And then this whole expression is being divided by 2 times a, and a is 2. So that's supposed to be a 2 right here. So 2 times 2. Just make sure that your division symbol is under this whole expression. The whole thing. Mathematically has to be this whole thing. All right, let's go ahead and simplify the radicand. So I get negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared is 100. And then I have a negative 4 times 2 is a negative 8, and a negative 8 times 7 is a negative 56. So I have 100 minus 56, all divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. So this becomes negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 56 is 44, all divided by 4. All right, let's simplify the square root of 44. So square root of 44, the largest perfect square that goes into 44 is 4. So remember, I can write this as the square root of 4 times the square root of 11. Remember, 4 times 4 is 11. And then the square root of 4, since 4 is a perfect square, the square root of 4 is 2. So I get 2 square root of 11. So that goes here. So negative 10 plus or minus 2 square root of 11 divided by 4. So notice, though, this choice is none of these. And what we talked about was the fact that if you look at this number here, this and this, these are all divisible by 2. So if I divide, and remember what you do to the numerator, you have to do the denominator. And you see, you got to think of this as 2 terms right here. So if you reduce, you got to reduce all these terms up here with a factor in the denominator. You can't just do each one individually. You can't say, I'm going to reduce this and leave this alone. You cannot do that. All right, so negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5, plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so that's a 1 right here when I reduce. 1 times square root of 11 is square root of 11, all divided by, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. And so if you were to, and you can leave your answer, your solutions like this, but we do have multiple choice. We do have multiple choices here, and they're separated by commas. So let's go ahead and just rewrite it as negative 5 plus the square root of 11 divided by 2. So that's one of your solutions. And then negative 5 minus the square root of 11 divided by 2. And so that choice, those solutions here, should be this one here. So we get C as a solution. All right, number 2. So again, if you notice your solution, your choices, they're either imaginary. So you have an I here, the imaginary number. So they're imaginary, or the choices are irrational. So I don't have any rational solutions. So that implies that I'm not going to even try to do this by solve this by factoring. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. But again, it's got to be in standard form, so I got to rewrite this. So I get 8x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. So remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you got to bring all the terms to one side, 0 in the other, and let's just go ahead and put in descending order. All right, now again, let's denote what a, b, and c are. So these are easy because a, b, and c are all positive. So a is 8, b is 7, and c is 2. And so I'm going to substitute that into the quadratic formula. So remember, quadratic formula is the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4ac. This whole expression, the whole thing, is being divided by 2a. And so I get x equal the opposite of 7, which is negative 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared. B is 7. I'm going to square it. Make sure you put that in parentheses. Minus 4 times a. A is 8, and c is 2. All divided by 2 times a, and a is 8. So I get negative 7 plus or minus, I'm simplifying the discriminant now, the radicand. So 7 squared is 49. And then I have negative 4 times this 2 is negative 8. And negative 8 times 8 is a negative 64. All divided by 16. So I get negative 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 15 divided by 16. And so remember, the square root of a negative 15 is the same thing as saying the square root of a negative 1 times the square root of 15. Now, there is no perfect square other than 1 that goes into 15, so I cannot simplify the square root of 15, but I do note that the square root of a negative 1 is I. Remember, this is I square root of 15. So I'm going to rewrite this as this. So I get negative 7 plus or minus, so I get negative 7 plus or minus I square root of 15 divided by 16. And if I were to, since these are listed as separate solutions, if I were to rewrite this, I would get negative 7 plus I square root of 15 divided by 16, and then negative 7 minus I square root of 15 divided by 16. And so these solutions are the ones that should be listed here. So so the correct choice is C. All right, so that was the key to solving these equations by using the quadratic formula.